I just uncovered my parents' darkest secret, the real insidious reason they're so hell-bent on making the new woman in our neighborhood out to be a villain. The truth is a far more terrifying and complicated thing than simple suburban judgment. It's a story that starts with gossip and ends with the FBI, a story that nearly cost me my life and ultimately saved it. I was 14 when all the boys in my class started gawking at the MILF who just moved into the neighborhood. Her name, we would later learn, was Diana Morrison. She was blonde, had legs that seemed to start at her shoulders, and always wore the same delicate pearl necklace, a single strand that seemed oddly out of place with the rest of her deliberately drab attire. The boys, fueled by a potent cocktail of hormones and summertime boredom, were all convinced they had a chance with her. You see, she was constantly hanging out around the areas where all the long-haul trucks were a dusty, forgotten lot on the edge of town. Some of the boys swore they saw her climb into a cab and leave with smudged lipstick, reappearing an hour later looking disheveled. Others, like the perpetually exaggerating Kevin Fields, claimed she'd been arrested twice for solicitation, though the charges he'd add with a knowing wink ended up being dropped. I grew up in a deeply conservative family, the kind where grace was said before every meal and the world was painted in stark strokes of black and white, good and evil. Even though I believed you should be kind to everyone, a principle drilled into me in Sunday school, my parents made it clear that this kindness had its limits. Diana Morrison was beyond those limits. My parents told me she was a terrible influence to avoid at all costs. That kind of woman, my mother would say, her lips tightening into a thin white line of disapproval, brings nothing but trouble. She lowers the tone of the whole neighborhood. My father, a man of few words and even fewer nuanced opinions, would just grunt in agreement his view of the world, neatly divided into good people who went to church and bad people who loitered at truck stops. There was very little room in between. So I got all my information from a nauseating cocktail of neighborhood gossip and furtive glances through the sheer curtains of my bedroom window, which conveniently overlooked her small rented house across the street. Honestly, I expected to see a caricature, a walking stereotype. I half imagined her prancing around in those tight Ice Spice shorts, or at least the optical illusion flares that were all over TikTok, a desperate attempt to cling to a youth that was fading in the harsh suburban sunlight. But the reality was baffling. Every day she wore the same uniform baggy, shapeless trousers and oversized hoodies, even when it was a sweltering 100 degrees outside. The hoodies were always plain gray, black, navy blue, with the hoods pulled up shadowing her face. It was a uniform of invisibility, a deliberate attempt to blend in, which stood in stark contrast to the lurid Technicolor tales being spun about her. This discrepancy was the first itch in my brain, the first hint that the story the neighborhood was telling itself was wrong. After a week of this silent observation, I finally saw her with a man. It was early evening, the sky a bruised purple, and he was kissing her in her front garden, right by the wilting rose bushes. But it wasn't a sordid, transactional kiss. He was handsome in a rugged, tired sort of way, and the kiss seemed tender, affectionate. He cupped her face in his hands, and she leaned into his touch. He looked like a boyfriend, not a customer. My mom saw it, too, from our kitchen window. "Disgusting," she muttered, turning away. "No shame whatsoever." But what I saw was a moment of genuine connection which only deepened the mystery. Nothing else she did made sense either. For example, she'd time her walks to always appear at the school bus stop at around 3:15 p.m. She wouldn't engage with anyone. She'd stand across the street leaning against the ancient oak tree and just watch. The high school boys, emboldened by their own myths about her, would sometimes catcall or whistle. She met their taunts with a blank, indifferent stare that seemed to suck the very air out of their bravado. She was always staring at the high school girls walking home in their little cliques, laughing and scrolling on their phones. Never the boys. Her gaze wasn't predatory or lecherous, it was analytical, searching, like a birdwatcher looking for a rare, specific species. I was so curious that my brain was itchy with questions, a constant low-grade hum of cognitive dissonance. Who was this woman? Why the shabby clothes but the expensive pearls? Why the tender boyfriend but the truck stop rumors? Why the intense focus on teenage girls? These were questions I thought would never be answered until one humid, suffocating evening in July when I was walking my golden Labrador Marley at around 9 p.m. My phone was dead, a predictable casualty of a day spent binge-watching a docuseries about cults. In a moment of supreme teenage hubris and impatience, I thought cutting through the truck stop would be faster than going the long way around the perimeter fence. It would shave a whole 5 minutes off my walk. Stupid, I know. My dad's warnings about stranger danger, which I'd always dismissed as overprotective and old-fashioned, felt like a distant, irrelevant hum. The air in the lot was thick and cloying, a mixture of diesel fumes, stale coffee, and something metallic I couldn't place. The rhythmic guttural hum of idling engines was the only sound a mechanical heartbeat in the oppressive dark. I was about halfway through navigating between the giant sleeping beasts of steel when a man stepped out from between two semis. He was maybe 40, wearing a stained flannel shirt with a paunch that strained against the buttons. He looked like someone's dad, which somehow made the entire encounter infinitely more sinister. "Hey, sweetheart, are you lost?" He asked, his voice a little too friendly, a little too syrupy. "Just passing through," I said, my voice barely a squeak. I tried to walk faster, my heart suddenly thudding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Marley, my usually goofy and placid dog, sensed my fear immediately. A low, menacing growl rumbled in his chest. "Where are you headed? It's late. I can give you a ride," he offered, taking a deliberate step that cut off my path. My escape route was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the back of my neck. Then another man appeared from the other side, stepping out from the deep shadows of a different truck. He was slightly younger, with a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, obscuring his face. They were closing in casually, like it was perfectly normal, like two wolves herding a lamb into a corner. My dad's lectures, his pleas to "be aware of your surroundings," screamed in my head. "My dad's picking me up right there," I lied, pointing vaguely ahead into the inky darkness where there was nothing but more trucks and the faint glow of the distant highway. "That's funny," Baseball Cap said, a smirk playing on his lips, "because I don't see any cars waiting." They were steering me subtly but firmly towards a specific truck. It was different from the others. It had no company logo, just a plain white cab and a dark, completely windowless trailer. The lock on the trailer door was on the outside, a heavy-duty industrial-grade padlock that looked chillingly, terrifyingly out of place. This wasn't for keeping people out. It was for keeping people in. My blood ran cold. This was it. This was the moment your parents warn you about, the moment you always think happens to other people in other towns. Suddenly, a figure stumbled into the faint light. It was her, Diana Morrison. "Liam," she slurred, looking convincingly, impressively inebriated. She stumbled toward them, her movements exaggerated and clumsy, a caricature of a drunk. "You promised you'd wait for me, baby." She draped herself all over flannel shirt, who I now guessed was Liam. Her perfume, a cheap, cloying floral scent I'd never smelled on her before, filled the air so strong it made my eyes water. "Get lost, you crazy bitch," he snarled, trying to shake her off while maintaining his grip on my arm. His fingers were digging into my bicep, and he was surprisingly strong. She wailed louder, a pathetic keening sound that made me flinch with its sheer theatricality. "But you said you loved me. You said I was special." Then, with a sudden violent lurch, she accidentally vomited all over his steel-toed boots. It wasn't fake. It was real, horrifically real. The smell was acidic and awful, a mix of bile and whatever she'd had for dinner. It was a weaponized expulsion. He let go of me in a shout of pure disgust, calling her every foul name imaginable. In that split second of his distraction, she immediately seamlessly stumbled between us, creating a physical barrier with her own body. She squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly firm, her nails digging into my palms so hard it left marks. It wasn't a stumble. It was a signal. Run. Baseball Cap, recovering from the shock, tried to grab me, but she drunkenly fell into him, too, knocking him completely off balance. "Oopsie," she giggled, her voice a jarring, high-pitched counterpoint to the raw terror of the moment. I didn't need a second signal. I ran. I ran like my life depended on it, because I knew it did. I ran all the way home, my lungs burning, the sound of my own ragged breaths filling my ears. Marley, for his part, barely kept up his paws, scrabbling on the asphalt, his leash a tangled mess behind me. I didn't stop until I burst through my own front door, slamming it shut and locking it behind me, collapsing against it in a heap of sweat and terror. The next morning, as soon as my parents were awake and sipping their coffee, I told them everything. I was still shaking, the events of the night replaying in a terrifying, relentless loop in my mind. The smell of diesel, the padlock, the feel of Liam's fingers on my arm. "Mom, last night something awful happened at the truck stop." "Oh, trust me, I heard all about it." She said, her tone not of concern, but of ice-cold anger. My trembling relief at being safe curdled instantly into confusion. "Mrs. Tarr from down the street saw you with that woman. She called me first thing this morning. Do you have any idea how dangerous she is? What were you thinking, being seen with her?" I tried to explain. My voice was frantic, desperate. I told them about the men, the way they cornered me, the windowless truck, the lock on the outside, the bone-deep terror I'd felt. But Dad cut me off his face a mask of profound disappointment that was somehow worse than anger. "She's been harassing drivers for weeks, making false accusations. Liam, the man you mentioned, is a respected member of his church. He and his friend were probably just concerned for you, a young girl out alone, and were trying to help you. You're lucky they're not pressing charges against you for being involved in her sick schemes." It was like talking to a brick wall, a wall that had already decided I was a liar. They had their narrative, the one spoon-fed to them by neighborhood gossips and their own rigid prejudices, and my reality, my trauma, didn't fit. My mother, in a move of what she saw as decisive parenting, immediately called her therapist friend, Dr. Reyes, and put him on speakerphone. I listened stunned into silence as she fed him a heavily edited version of the story where I was a confused, lonely, impressionable girl who was being manipulated by a seasoned, predatory woman. "This is textbook predator behavior," Dr. Reyes explained in his calm, authoritative, impossibly reasonable voice that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. "They create a fake danger, then save you from it. It's a classic trauma bond. She's grooming you, making you feel indebted to her so she can exploit you later for money or something worse. Your daughter is the victim here, but not of those truckers. She's the victim of this woman's elaborate con." By dinner time, they'd completely convinced themselves and were working tirelessly to convince me that I had narrowly escaped being recruited into some sort of con artist ring by Diana Morrison. They talked and talked their words, weaving a new reality around me, a thick fog of doubt and confusion. Maybe I had imagined the lock. Maybe those men really were just tired truckers offering a ride. Maybe Diana's vomit was just a lucky coincidence. Their certainty was so absolute that my own memory started to feel shaky, unreliable. But there was one thing I couldn't forget, one piece of physical evidence that anchored me to my truth: the bruises her grip had left on my hand. 5 perfect crescent-shaped marks of desperation, a silent testament to the reality of the danger. A week passed in a tense, suffocating quiet. I was grounded, of course. My parents watched my every move. Then I woke up to shouting outside. It was 2:00 a.m. The digital clock on my nightstand glowing red in the dark. I scrambled to my window and peered through the blinds. A crowd had gathered in front of her house, a 21st century mob, their faces illuminated by the harsh blue light of their phone screens, and a few flickering tiki torches someone had brought from their patio. "We know what you are," someone yelled, their voice cracking with self-righteous fury. Diana stood on her small concrete porch, arms crossed, saying nothing. She was bathed in the cold, unforgiving light of her porch lamp, looking small and alone. Someone else, braver than the rest, threw a rock. It shattered her front picture window with a sickening crash that made me jump. "Kitty Fiddler!" Mrs. Tarr screamed, her voice shrill and full of a venomous glee. "Getting our daughters involved in your sick games. Those truckers told us everything." Another voice, a man's this time, shouted, "We know how you lure young girls to them for money." Those nisemnes. I watched Diana's face, expecting to see anger or fear or defiance, but there was none of that. She just looked tired, utterly bone-deeply tired, as if she'd been through this exact scene 100 times before. And that's when I saw him, baseball cap. He was standing at the edge of the crowd, partially hidden by the thick trunk of a large oak tree, recording the entire spectacle on his phone, a faint, cruel smile on his face. Nobody else noticed him, but she did. Their eyes met for a fleeting, charged second across the lawn, and I saw her jaw clench, a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of steel beneath the crushing exhaustion. The mob eventually dispersed when the threat of police sirens grew too loud. The next morning, when I went to bring Marley inside from his morning constitutional in the front garden, I noticed something odd. A small folded piece of paper had been tucked neatly into the inside of his collar. It was damp from Marley's drool, but the handwriting inside a neat, compact script was clear and precise. It read, "Thursday night trucks transport missing teens across state lines. The other cops take bribes. Agent Williams at the FBI field office will believe you." I stared at the note, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold it steady. Agent Williams, FBI, Thursday nights. She must have slipped it into his collar during the chaos of the rescue. She knew who I was, where I lived. The rescue hadn't been an accident. She'd planned it. I shoved the note deep into the pocket of my jeans just as my mom opened the front door. "Get inside right now." She snapped her face tight with a new kind of anxiety. "And bring that dog with you." The house felt suffocating, a prison of good intentions. Dad was pacing back and forth in the living room, his phone pressed tightly to his ear. "Yes, officer, we understand. We'll keep her away from that woman." "Absolutely. We're looking into professional help for her." "Who was that?" I asked, my voice small. "The police?" Mom said, avoiding my eyes as she scrubbed at an invisible spot on the kitchen counter. "They're handling the situation with the vandalism. You are not to go near that house or that woman again. Is that clear?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake them and show them the note and tell them they had it all disastrously, dangerously wrong. That the woman they were vilifying wasn't the villain, she was the hero. But the note felt like it was burning a hole through the denim of my jeans. It was a secret, a dangerous one, and I knew with a chilling certainty that they would take it from me, convinced they were protecting me. Instead of fighting, I just nodded and went upstairs to my room. From my window, I watched the last of the gawkers and neighborhood vigilantes slowly disperse. Diana stayed on her porch until the very last car drove away. Then she turned, stepped carefully over the glittering shards of broken glass, and went inside, closing the door on the world that hated her. Baseball cap was gone too, having melted back into the shadows. The next morning, my cousin Jake arrived for his annual 2-week summer visit. He was 17, 3 years older than me, about to start college for computer science, and was without a doubt the only member of my extended family who didn't treat me like a little kid. He saw me as a person, not a project to be managed. "Heard you had some excitement," he said, dumping his duffel bag in the guest room. His tone was light, but his eyes were sharp. My mom had already gotten to him, of course, filling his head with the official story of my near recruitment by a dangerous con woman. "Jake's going to help keep an eye on you this summer," she announced at breakfast, a cheerful pronouncement that felt more like a prison sentence. "Make sure you don't get mixed up with any more trouble." Jake caught my eye from across the table and gave me a barely perceptible wink. Later that afternoon, when our parents went out for their weekly grocery shopping trip, he cornered me in the kitchen. "Okay," he said, leaning against the counter, his arms crossed. "Spill. What really happened?" A dam of silence and fear broke inside me. I told him everything. The men at the truck stopped the visceral terror, Diana's vomit-fueled rescue, the angry mob, and finally the note. The note about the FBI. Jake listened without interrupting his usual laid-back, goofy expression, growing more and more serious with each detail. When I finished, my voice hoarse, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he just said, "Show me the note." I retrieved it from where I'd hidden it, pressed flat between the pages of my old locked diary. Jake took it, handling it carefully, as if it were a historical artifact. He studied it, holding it up to the light. "This is real," he said finally, his voice low. "How can you tell? The handwriting, the paper quality. But it's more than that. Someone who knows tradecraft wrote this. Tradecraft like spy stuff." "Exactly. Look." He pointed to a series of faint indentations on the paper visible only when you angled it just right in the light. "She wrote this on top of something else, probably a notepad, to disguise the natural pressure points of her handwriting, a common forensic countermeasure. Then she likely destroyed the original page this was written on." Jake pulled out his sleek, powerful laptop. "Let's see what we can find about our mysterious neighbor." We spent the next hour digging. Jake was a wizard, a digital ghost knowing which obscure databases to check, how to search cached pages and deep web archives that I didn't even know existed. He bypassed paywalls and dug through public records. Finally, he found something. "Here," he said, turning the screen toward me. "Diana Morrison, licensed youth counselor and social worker, until 3 years ago." The photo on the screen showed a younger, happier version of our neighbor. Her blonde hair was styled professionally, and she was smiling at a community center ribbon-cutting ceremony. She looked vibrant, full of purpose. "What happened 3 years ago?" I asked, my heart pounding. Jake clicked through more links, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Says here, she lost her license for inappropriate and unethical intervention in a family matter." He frowned, scrolling down. "But look at this." He'd found a local news article from a different city published around the same time. The headline read, "3 teenage girls rescued from trafficking ring, operating out of youth retreat." I read the subheader, my breath catching in my throat. "Anonymous tip from former social worker leads to arrests." "The timing matches perfectly," Jake said, his eyes wide with the implication. "I bet she was the anonymous tip. She probably went outside the proper channels because the proper channels were corrupt or moving too slowly. They couldn't prove her methods were by the book. So they punished her for it by taking her license, her career, her life." We heard our parents' car pulling into the driveway and quickly closed the laptop, the screen going dark just as the front door opened. The smell of grocery bags and my mom's perfume filled the hall. But that night, long after the house had gone quiet, Jake knocked softly on my door. "Thursday is in 2 days," he whispered, slipping into my room. "We need to see what happens at that truck stop. We need evidence." "How Mom and Dad won't let me leave the house after dark. They think I'm a flight risk or a future delinquent or something." Jake grinned, a flash of his usual mischievous self returning. "Leave that to me." The next day, I dug out my old pair of binoculars from my brief 2-week-long bird-watching phase in 6th grade. "We can watch from the hill behind the truck stop," I suggested. "It's overgrown with weeds and bushes. It's perfect cover." Wednesday night, I barely slept, my mind racing with a mixture of terror and a strange, exhilarating sense of purpose. Thursday afternoon, Jake executed his plan flawlessly. He told our parents he was taking me to see a 5:00 p.m. showing of a new superhero blockbuster, a loud, dumb movie they knew I wanted to see. Instead of going to the multiplex, we hiked up the steep wooded hill overlooking the truck stop. The summer sun was still high in the sky at 7:00 p.m., giving us good visibility of the lot below. "There," Jake said, passing me the binoculars. "Same trucks as always." I focused the lenses, the cheap plastic digging into my eye sockets. The lot below came into sharp relief. 3 unremarkable semis were parked in the back corner, far away from the bright, buzzing overhead lights of the main station. None of them had company logos just like the one from my encounter. They were ghost trucks. My hands started to tremble. Then a familiar car pulled up beside one of the trucks. "Jake, that's Tyler from my school. He's a senior. He's on the football team." We watched as Tyler got out and knocked on the cab of one of the trucks. The door opened and a flash of blonde hair appeared. A girl, maybe 15 or 16, climbed down from the passenger seat of Tyler's car. She looked scared, clutching her backpack to her chest. Tyler spoke to her for a moment, then led her to the driver of the truck, a large, shadowy figure. He handed her off like a piece of luggage. The driver gave Tyler something in return, an envelope thick with what had to be cash. "He's selling them." I whispered the words, tasting like poison. The banal evil of it was horrifying. Tyler wasn't some shadowy monster. He was a popular kid who sat 2 rows behind me in biology. Jake was already taking photos with the telephoto lens on his phone, the quiet clicks, sounding like gunshots in the oppressive stillness of the woods. "We need more evidence. Keep watching." Over the next hour, 2 more cars arrived, each delivering a teenage girl. Each time Tyler appeared smiling and laughing to coordinate the exchange. The trucks never left, just sat there silently collecting their human cargo. "They must be waiting for something," Jake said, his voice grim. "Or someone." At 9:15 p.m., a sleek black SUV with heavily tinted windows rolled silently into the lot. A man in an expensive-looking suit got out and spoke briefly to each of the 3 drivers. He was the manager, the coordinator. After a final nod, he got back in his vehicle, and one by one the trucks started their engines, their low, threatening rumble vibrating through the ground beneath us. "They're leaving," I said, my voice shaking. "Those girls." "License plates," Jake said urgently. "Read them to me, now." I called out the numbers and letters as fast as I could, my voice cracking while he typed them into a secure note app on his phone. The convoy pulled out of the lot, heading toward the interstate, a slow, dark, funereal procession. We stayed hidden in the brush until we were absolutely sure they were gone. Then we carefully, quietly made our way down the steep, slippery incline. My legs were trembling, and not just from the difficult descent. "We have to tell someone," I said, the words catching in my throat. "We will. But first, we need to be smart about this." Jake looked grim, the weight of what we'd just witnessed settling on his young shoulders like a shroud. "Your parents won't believe us, and if the note is right and the local cops are taking bribes." "Agent Williams," I said the name, a lifeline, a prayer. "The note said he'd believe us." "Then that's where we start. Tomorrow we're going on another movie trip, this time to the FBI field office downtown." When we finally got home, hours after the movie would have ended, my mom was waiting in the entryway, her arms crossed, her foot tapping an impatient rhythm on the hardwood floor. "The movie ended an hour ago." "We got ice cream after," Jake said smoothly, not missing a beat. "My treat. Sorry, I should have called." Mom's expression softened slightly, her anger deflating in the face of Jake's easy charm. "Well, next time call. And speaking of calls, Dr. Reyes wants to see you tomorrow." My stomach dropped like a stone into a deep, cold well. "Why?" "He's concerned about your fixation on that woman. He said what you're experiencing is common after a trauma bond is established, and he's offered to fit you in for an emergency session." I looked at Jake, a silent, panicked plea in my eyes. He gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "Play along." "Okay," I said, my voice betraying none of the roiling panic I felt. "What time?" 3:00. I'll drive you." That night, Jake slipped into my room again. "Change of plans," he whispered, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone. "We'll go to the FBI right after your therapy appointment. Tell your mom I'm picking you up to hang out at the arcade." "What if Dr. Reyes tells her not to let me? What if he convinces her I need to be locked up somewhere? Then we'll think of something else," he said, though his confidence seemed a little strained. "But right now, we need to play along. Don't give them any reason to suspect you're not buying their story." I nodded, but sleep didn't come. I kept thinking about those girls in the trucks, their scared faces illuminated for a brief moment in the car headlights, wondering where they were now, what they were enduring, all while I was safe in my bed. The next morning, Diana Morrison's house was quiet. Her car was gone, and a day's worth of newspapers was piling up on her porch. Had she left because of the mob, or was she out there somewhere following those trucks, a solitary, tired guardian angel on their tail? At breakfast, Mom watched me like a hawk. "You seem tired. Just didn't sleep well." "Dr. Reyes says that's common with trauma," she said, her voice dripping with clinical concern. "You'll feel better after you talk to him." I forced myself to eat a piece of toast, even though every bite tasted like cardboard. Dad had already left for work, and Mom spent the morning on the phone with various neighbors, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur of gossip and concern. "She's definitely gone." I heard her tell someone, probably Mrs. Tarr. Diane saw her loading boxes into her car at 5:00 a.m. this morning. Good riddance to bad rubbish. Diane was my Aunt Mom's younger sister. She was a nurse who worked with at-risk youth. She was supposed to visit next month, but Mom hadn't mentioned it lately. By the time we left for Dr. Reyes' office, I had practiced my act a dozen times in my head. I had to seem convinced, compliant, and most importantly, confused. Dr. Reyes' office was in a nondescript strip mall sandwiched between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. The waiting room smelled of artificial lavender and simmering anxiety. "I'll be right out here," Mom said, settling into a worn armchair with a magazine, looking immensely relieved to be handing me over to a professional. Reyes was younger than I'd expected, maybe in his early 30s, with thick-rimmed glasses and a carefully trimmed beard that seemed meticulously designed to project wisdom beyond his years. His office had the obligatory Freudian couch, but he gestured to a firm, uncomfortable-looking chair across from his large mahogany desk. "So," he said, clicking his pen with a sound that set my teeth on edge, "tell me about Thursday night." I repeated the story I told my parents, but this time I laced it with the doubt they had so carefully planted in my mind. I guess I could have misunderstood. It all happened so fast. Maybe they were just trying to help and she overreacted. "That's very insightful of you to recognize," Dr. Reyes said, making a note on his legal pad. "Trauma can significantly distort our perceptions. It's a very positive sign that you're able to acknowledge that." He then shifted gears so smoothly it was almost imperceptible. "Tell me, how are things at home?" The question caught me completely off guard. "They're fine." "Why?" "Well, sometimes when we're feeling unhappy or misunderstood in our home environment, we can unconsciously seek out danger or chaos. It's a form of escape, a way to feel a sense of control when we feel we have none." "I'm not unhappy," I said, a little too quickly, a little too defensively. He smiled a condescending, all-knowing smile that adults use when they think you're in deep denial. "Have you ever felt like your parents don't really understand you? Like you just need some space to figure things out on your own?" Warning bells, loud and clear and deafening, went off in my head. These weren't normal therapy questions. This was a script. He was leading me somewhere. "Sometimes," I said carefully, trying to sound like a typical sullen teenager. "But doesn't every teenager feel that way?" "Of course. And there are healthy, structured ways for young people to gain that independence. Have you ever heard of wilderness therapy programs?" My heart started racing, a frantic drumming against my ribs, but I kept my face a neutral, curious mask. Like summer camp. Similar, but with a more intensive therapeutic focus. It's a chance for young people to reset away from the negative influences from home and school. They build confidence, learn valuable coping skills, and come back with a whole new perspective on life. He slid a glossy trifold brochure across the polished surface of his desk. Happy multiracial teenagers laughed around a campfire on the cover. Horizon's Youth Retreat was printed in cheerful, friendly sans serif letters. "Some of your classmates have found it very helpful." He continued, his voice as smooth as silk. "Tyler Morrison, for instance, just got back from a similar program. He's been sharing his positive experience with other students he thinks might benefit." Tyler Morrison, Diana's last name. The boy from the truck stop. They were related. My mind reeled. I forced myself to look interested, to pick up the brochure and finger its glossy edge. "How long is the program?" "It varies. It's tailored to the individual. Some students benefit from just a few weeks. Others need longer to really process their issues and integrate the lessons they learn." He leaned forward, his eyes intense behind his glasses. "I think you'd be an excellent candidate, especially given recent events. It would be a chance to clear your head away from all this." I took the brochure, my hands surprisingly steady despite the violent churning in my stomach. "Okay, I'll think about it." "Wonderful. And in the meantime, I'd like to see you twice a week just to monitor how you're processing everything." The session continued for another 20 excruciating minutes, with Dr. Reyes asking more and more probing questions about my friendships, my relationship with my parents, whether I ever felt unsafe, or unheard at home. He was building a case for my removal. By the time we finished, I felt like I'd been psychologically turned inside out and examined under a microscope. My mom was all smiles when I came out into the waiting room. "How did it go, sweetie?" "Great," Dr. Reyes said before I could even open my mouth. She's very receptive to the therapeutic process. I've given her some information about some additional resources that could be very beneficial. In the car on the way home, Mom glanced at the Horizons brochure on my lap. "Oh, that looks wonderful, fresh air, structured activities, getting away from all these bad influences. Maybe we should seriously consider it for the rest of the summer. Maybe—" I said, my fingers flying as I texted Jake under the dashboard. "He's a recruiter for them. The place is called Horizons. Tyler's last name is Morrison. Can I just think about it for a few days?" "Of course, honey. But Dr. Reyes is right. You need some distance from all this drama." Jake was waiting at the corner near our house, pretending to be engrossed in a game on his phone. Mom let me out of the car, reminding me to be home by 6:00 p.m. for dinner. "How'd it go?" he asked as soon as we were out of earshot. I handed him the brochure and explained everything, my voice low and urgent. His face darkened with each detail. "This is so much bigger than we thought," he said. "Dr. Reyes isn't just a therapist. He's a feeder. He's using his professional position to identify and funnel vulnerable kids to them." He glanced at Diana's empty, silent house. "The FBI office, definitely. But first," he steered me toward her house. "We need to check something." The house looked even more abandoned up close. A fine layer of dust coated the windows. Newspapers covered the porch and mail was spilling from the rusted mailbox. But Jake wasn't interested in the front of the house. "Garbage day is tomorrow morning," he said, leading me around back to the alley. If she left in a hurry, she might have tossed something important. 3 large bins, trash, recycling, and yard waste sat by the back fence. Jake, ever prepared, pulled on a pair of latex gloves he'd brought from home and started methodically searching through the recycling bin. I kept watch, my heart hammering against my ribs, terrified a neighbor would see us and call the cops. "Got it," he whispered, after a few minutes pulling out a slightly damp manila folder from beneath a pile of junk mail. "Look at this." Inside were printed copies of emails. The sender addresses were partially obscured with black marker, but I could still make out @darrise.clinic on several of them. The recipient was someone named Kyle. "The Morrison girl is a perfect candidate for the program," Jake read aloud in a low, shocked whisper. "Parents are overwhelmed. There's a history of what they call running away. No one will question a few months of intensive treatment. We can have her transported by the end of the week." My blood ran cold. The Morrison girl. That had to be Tyler's sister. "Jake." I whispered the name, surfacing from some deep recess of my memory. "Megan Morrison. She was in my gym class last year. She went to some special camp last summer. She came back different, really quiet. Everyone just thought she'd finally grown up." We photographed every single page with our phones, then carefully replaced the folder exactly as we'd found it, and wiped the lid of the bin clean of our fingerprints. As we walked quickly away from the house, I noticed the curtains moving in the house across the street. Mrs. Tarr's house. "Someone saw us," I said, my voice tight with panic. "Then we better hurry." The FBI field office was a 40-minute bus ride downtown. Jake had researched the route, timing it so we'd arrive an hour before the public information office closed. The building was intimidating, a modern fortress of smoked glass and steel, with uniformed security guards at the entrance. "We need to speak to Agent Williams," Jake told the receptionist, his voice impressively steady and mature. "It's about a tip we received concerning human trafficking." The receptionist, a woman with tired eyes and a stern bun, looked skeptical, her eyes flicking between me and Jake. She probably sized us up as pranksters or kids with overactive imaginations. But then Jake slid the note, Diana's note, under the glass partition. Her expression changed instantly. The skepticism evaporated, replaced by a flicker of alarm. "Wait here." 10 minutes later, which felt like an eternity, a tall black man in a crisp dark suit emerged from a secure doorway. He had a kind, but no-nonsense face, with eyes that seemed to see everything. "I'm Agent Williams," he said, his voice calm and deep. "You have information for me." We spent the next hour in a small, windowless beige conference room. We showed him everything: the photos from the truck stop, stakeout, the list of license plate numbers, the pictures of the emails from the garbage, the glossy brochure from Dr. Reyes. Agent Williams listened intently, his face impassive, taking meticulous notes on a yellow legal pad. He occasionally asked a sharp, clarifying question, but he never once made us feel like kids, never once dismissed our story as fantasy. He took us seriously. "This is good work," he said finally, steepling his long fingers. "But I need you to understand something. These operations are complex and deeply rooted in the community. It takes time to build a case that will stick. These people have good lawyers, but those girls are our top priority. We've been tracking this ring for months, but we've had holes in our intelligence. Your information, it fills in several crucial gaps." He leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "The woman who gave you that note, Diana Morrison, she's been helping us, unofficially, off the books." "So she really was protecting kids?" I asked, a wave of profound validation washing over me. "Like me, she lost everything for it once before. Her career, her reputation, her family. Now she does what she can from the shadows." His expression turned grave. "Which means you two need to be very, very careful. These people have eyes and ears everywhere. Dr. Reyes, Tyler, Morrison, they're just the local recruiters." "What should we do?" Jake asked, his voice low. "Go home. Act normal. Do not under any circumstances let them know you suspect anything. If Dr. Reyes pushes the wilderness program stall, say you need time to convince your parents that they're worried about the money. We'll be watching. All of you." He gave us his direct cell phone number and made us promise to check in daily with any new information, no matter how small or insignificant it seemed. The bus ride home was quiet and tense, both of us processing the terrifying scope of what we had uncovered. This wasn't just a few bad men at a truck stop. It was a network, a business. "Your hand," Jake said suddenly, nodding towards my lap. I looked down. In my anxiety during the meeting, I'd been gripping a pen so tightly that my knuckles were white. My left hand had a fresh set of faint bruises, probably from gripping the binoculars too tight for 2 hours the night before. In the harsh, unforgiving, fluorescent light of the city bus, they looked unnervingly like finger marks. "We'll say you fell," he said, "but someone's going to notice." He was right. At dinner that night, my mom, her senses apparently heightened by a day of worry, zeroed in on them immediately. "What happened to your hand?" she asked, her fork hovering over her plate. "Tripped walking Marley this afternoon." I said the lie coming more easily now than I was comfortable with. "Caught myself weird on the pavement." She frowned, unconvinced, but didn't push it. Dad was distracted by a stream of work emails on his phone, and Jake smoothly changed the subject to his college orientation plans. But later, while I was helping with the dishes, my mom came up behind me and grabbed my wrist, her touch surprisingly gentle. "These don't look like bruises from a fall." Her eyes were filled with a confusing mixture of fear and suspicion. "Did someone grab you? Was it that woman? Did she come back?" "No, Mom. I told you I fell." She studied my face, searching for a crack in my story, a tell. Then she sighed, a sound of profound parental weariness and defeat. "I'm calling Dr. Reyes in the morning. Maybe we should move up your next appointment." That night, I lay awake in bed, my phone clutched in my hand, thinking about Diana Morrison. Somewhere out there, she was still watching, still working, still protecting kids like me, even after losing everything. My phone buzzed silently. A text from Jake in the next room. "Aunt Diane is coming early. Mom just told me. She'll be here on Tuesday. Aunt Diane." Mom's younger sister, the cool aunt, the one who actually listened, who remembered the name of my current favorite band, who didn't talk to me like I was a half-formed human. Maybe, just maybe, we were about to find another adult who would actually believe us. Saturday morning brought new drama. Mrs. Tarr was at our front door before 800 a.m., practically vibrating with a fresh batch of salacious gossip. "That woman's house," she said breathlessly. after Mom invited her in for a cup of coffee she didn't need. "Someone broke in last night. The police are there right now." I hovered in the hallway, pretending to look for a book, my ears straining to catch every word. "Probably one of her Johns looking for his money back," Mrs. Tarr speculated with ghoulish delight. "Or maybe looking for her stash. You know these types always have substances." "Did they catch anyone?" Mom asked, her voice a low murmur. "No, but they made a real mess of the place." The police officer told Jim from next door that it looked like someone was searching for something specific. Papers and files were everywhere. Jake and I exchanged a terrified look from across the room. Someone else was looking for those emails. They knew Diana had evidence against them, and now they might be wondering who else had seen it. "I'm just so glad she's gone," Mom said with a sigh of genuine relief. "The neighborhood feels safer already." I wanted to scream that Diana Morrison was the only reason I was safe, the only reason another girl wasn't being loaded onto a truck bound for God knows where. But I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood and retreated to the silence of my room. Jake knocked a few minutes later. "We need to be more careful," he said, his face pale. "They're cleaning house." "You think they know we have copies?" "Maybe. Or maybe they're just meticulously, professionally covering their tracks." He sat on the edge of my bed. "Agent Williams texted me back. He said to keep to our normal routines. No more investigating. He's right, we've done our part. Now we have to wait." Waiting was a unique form of torture. Every time I saw Tyler Morrison at the grocery store or passed Dr. Rhea's office on my way to the library, I felt a surge of hot, helpless anger. But I played my part. I went to my next therapy appointment on Monday, feigning an air of thoughtful consideration. "The retreat does sound interesting," I told Dr. Reyes, trying to sound like a genuinely indecisive teenager. "But my parents are worried about the cost. It's a lot of money." "Oh, there are scholarships available," he said quickly, a little too eagerly. His eyes lit up. "For the right candidates, of course. Students who show real potential for growth and who would truly benefit from the immersive experience." "Like who?" I asked, pushing my luck. "Well, Tyler's sister Megan, for example, received a full scholarship, and she's doing wonderfully now, very focused on her schoolwork, holding down a part-time job. A real success story." I remembered the Megan I'd seen at school. She used to be loud, funny, the vibrant, sarcastic life of her friend group. Now she walked the halls like a ghost, her eyes perpetually downcast, speaking only when spoken to in a quiet monotone. "I'd love to talk to her about it," I said, testing him, watching his reaction. "Doctor." Reyes's practiced therapeutic smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the edges. "I'm sure that could be arranged, though she's quite busy these days with her new job at the mall." After the session, I told Mom I wanted to go clothes shopping. She was thrilled that I was showing interest in something normal and handed me a $50 bill. The mall was crowded with summer shoppers. I found Megan working at a pretzel stand in the food court, mechanically rolling and twisting dough, her movements precise and robotic. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, "can I get a cinnamon sugar pretzel?" She looked up, and for a split second I saw a flicker of raw animal fear in her eyes, then a flash of recognition. "Sure," she said quietly, her voice flat. While she prepared my order, her back to the rest of the bustling food court, I leaned closer. "Dr. Reyes suggested I talk to you about the wilderness program," I whispered. Her hand stilled on the dough for a fraction of a second. "It's great," she said in that same flat, rehearsed monotone. "It really helped me get my priorities straight." It was a line, a well-rehearsed, empty line. "Megan," I said softly, using her name to try and break through the thick wall of conditioning. "I know something's wrong. I think I can help you." "You can't," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously around the food court, checking for someone. "No one can. Just don't go. Make up any excuse you can think of, but don't go." "What happened to you there?" I pressed. She glanced nervously over her shoulder then as she handed me my pretzel and the receipt. She quickly scribbled something on the back of the thin paper. "I can't talk," she mouthed, her eyes wide with terror. "They're always watching." I walked away, my heart pounding, and unfolded the receipt. Below the price of the pretzel, she had written in shaky, barely legible letters, "Not therapy. Ranch, Work, no pay, no phones, guards, don't go. On Tuesday morning, Aunt Diane arrived. While I was taking Marley for his morning walk, her dusty sedan pulled up to the curb. She looked tired from the long drive, but her face broke into a wide, genuine smile when she saw me. "Let me see my favorite niece," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. Then her smile faded as she held me at arm's length, looking at me closely. "You've lost weight." "Just summer stuff," I said evasively. She noticed my hand next the ugly, fading bruises on my left hand, now a sickly yellow-green. Without a word, she took it gently, her cool fingers examining the marks with the practiced, dispassionate eye of the ER nurse she was. "These are grip marks," she said quietly, her voice devoid of judgment or accusation. "Who grabbed you?" "I fell." I recited the lie, feeling flimsy and stupid in the face of her calm certainty. "Honey, don't lie to me." Her voice was firm but kind, a tone that demanded the truth without issuing a threat. "I've seen too many kids with stories about falling down the stairs. I know what abuse looks like." Something in her tone, in her unwavering, unconditional belief, broke through my carefully constructed defenses. "It's complicated," I whispered, my eyes suddenly welling up with hot tears. "Then let's uncomplicate it," she said, putting an arm around my shoulders. "Walk with me." We made a slow loop around the block as the whole sordid story came pouring out of me, from the gossip about Diana to the note from Megan. Unlike my parents, she didn't interrupt, didn't dismiss, didn't try to reshape my reality to fit her own preconceived worldview. She just listened. When I finally finished, my voice raw, she was quiet for a long, thoughtful moment. "Show me the emails," she said finally, "and Megan's note." Back in my room, with Jake standing guard at the door, I pulled up the photos on his laptop. Aunt Diane studied them carefully, her expression growing darker and more furious with each slide. "I know this program," she said, her voice low and tight with anger. "Not by this name, but by its effects. We've had kids come through my hospital from places like this. Malnourished, dehydrated, overworked, some with untreated infections from farm accidents. Traumatized into silence, but they're always too scared to talk, and the parents have already signed legal waivers a mile long absolving the school of all responsibility. So you believe me?" I asked, a wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy, washing over me. "I believe every single word," she said, pulling me into another hug, a real protective, fierce hug. "And we are going to stop this." That afternoon, while Mom was at her weekly book club meeting, Aunt Diane called a family meeting, just me, Jake, and my dad. "We need to talk about Dr. Reyes," she began, dispensing with any pleasantries. My dad immediately got defensive. "He's a respected professional, Diane. He's helping her process a very traumatic event. He's grooming her for a human trafficking ring," Aunt Diane said, bluntly dropping the bomb into the quiet living room with no preamble. The room erupted. Dad accused her of being dramatic, of overstepping, of filling my head with paranoid fantasies. Jake backed her up, pulling out his laptop to show Dad our compiled evidence, the photos, the emails, the note. I sat frozen, watching my family fracture and splinter right in front of me. Finally, Aunt Diane held up her hand for silence and pulled out her phone. "Listen to this." She played a recording. It was from my last session with Dr. Reyes. My voice was tiny and hesitant. His was smooth, persuasive, and utterly chilling. I hadn't known, but Jake, in his infinite foresight, had given me a recording app disguised as a music player on my old iPod Touch. Dr. Reyes's voice was clear and damning. Some students need longer to really process their issues and integrate the lessons. The program is very effective at breaking down resistance. My dad's face went pale. "You recorded that without his consent. That's illegal." "To protect your daughter from being sold, yes, I did." Aunt Diane snapped, her voice cracking with fury. "Are you listening to what he's really saying? Breaking down resistance. That's not therapy terminology, Bob. That's brainwashing terminology. The recording continued, Dr. Reyes describing in his calm clinical voice how difficult teenage girls especially benefited from time away from negative family influences, how parents were often too close to the problem to see what their children really needed. When it ended, my dad slumped in his chair, looking like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "Oh my God. We're pulling her from therapy immediately," Aunt Diane said, her voice now calm and decisive. "And we're reporting him to the state licensing board." "But if he's connected to something bigger," Dad started, his voice weak. "The FBI is already investigating," Jake said quietly. "We've been in contact with an agent." Dad looked between the three of us, his sister-in-law, his nephew, his daughter, his face a battlefield of confusion and hurt and dawning, sickening horror. "Why didn't you tell me?" He finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Because you didn't believe me," I said quietly, the simple words hanging in the air between us, heavy and sharp. "Neither did Mom." He flinched as if I'd slapped him across the face. I thought I was protecting you." "You were protecting your idea of what happened," Aunt Diane said, her voice gentler now. "It's easier to believe your child was confused than to accept the fact that monsters and predators operate in plain sight with advanced degrees and nice offices in suburban strip malls." We spent the next hour going over everything again, Dad needing to hear it from an official source called Agent Williams himself. By the time my mom came home humming her book club tote bag over her shoulder, he was a changed man, a new, fierce, protective determination burning in his eyes. Convincing my mother was harder. It was so much harder. She had invested so much of her identity in the narrative of Diana Morrison as the predator and Dr. Reyes as the savior that accepting the truth meant admitting she had actively, though unknowingly, endangered her own daughter. "This is insane," she kept saying, shaking her head, twisting her wedding ring around and around her finger. "Dr. Reyes is a respected professional. He has degrees from good universities. His wife is in my garden club." "So did Ted Bundy," Aunt Diane countered grimly. "Credentials don't equal ethics." It took showing her Megan's desperate scribbled note. It took Dad explaining in a low, pained voice how Tyler Morrison, the son of her garden club friend, was recruiting girls from our school. It took playing Agent Williams' confirmation on speakerphone. Finally, she broke down, her body racked with deep, agonizing sobs. "I almost sent you to that camp," she cried, burying her face in her hands. "I was going to make you go. I almost sent you there." "But you didn't," I said, putting my arms around her, feeling the sharp, fragile bones of her shoulders under my hands. We stopped it. We stopped it in time. The next few days were a chaotic whirlwind. Agent Williams had our entire family come in to give formal videotape statements. Dr. Reyes's license was summarily suspended pending a full investigation. He was arrested a day later. Tyler Morrison was expelled from school when 3 other girls, emboldened by the news, and our family's report came forward about his recruitment tactics, promising them easy summer jobs or even modeling contracts. Without their local network of recruiters and therapists, the Horizons Youth Retreat program stopped targeting our area. A week later, Agent Williams called to tell us they had finally gotten the warrant to raid the ranch in another state. They found 17 girls living in conditions he said he wouldn't describe in detail over the phone. Diana Morrison's intelligence was crucial, he said. She's been tracking their movements and their feeder networks for 3 years, ever since they took her daughter. "Where is she now?" I asked, my voice thick. "She's safe. That's all I can say." But I knew she'd never really be safe, not as long as there were still predators out there, still girls who needed a guardian in the shadows. 6 months later, life had found a new, quieter normal. I was volunteering at the local youth center where Aunt Diane worked. It was after school on a dreary Thursday afternoon in February, and I was helping a middle schooler with his algebra homework when I saw her. Diana Morrison stood at the entrance speaking quietly to the receptionist. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, cut into a neat, sensible bob, and was its natural brown color. She was wearing professional clothes, a simple blouse, and dark trousers. But I recognized her immediately. The pearl necklace was gone. Our eyes met across the noisy, crowded room. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The cacophony of the center shouting kids, bouncing basketballs, bad pop music, seemed to fade into a muffled silence. Then she mouthed 2 words to me, "Thank you." I nodded, blinking back a sudden rush of tears. She turned to leave, and I almost let her go, but something inside me, a deep-seated need for closure, for understanding, made me jump up and run after her. "Wait!" I called out, my voice louder than I intended. She stopped in the doorway but didn't turn around. "You shouldn't be seen with me," she said, her voice low. "The story never really goes away." "I don't care what people think anymore." She finally turned, a sad, knowing smile touching her lips. "You will when it affects your college applications, your job prospects. The label follows you. Troubled girl, complicated family situation." "Is that why you do it?" I asked. "Why you watch the bus stops?" "Someone has to," she said simply. "There's always another Dr. Reyes, another Tyler, another program promising to fix troubled teens. The model works. The woman in the emails—" I asked the question I'd been holding on to for months. The Morrison girl. Was that Tyler's older sister? A flicker of unbearable pain crossed her face so raw it was hard to look at. "My daughter," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were full of a pain so deep it seemed bottomless. "Her name was Sarah. I tried to report my ex-husband and his program through all the proper channels. They said I was a bitter ex-wife making false accusations. The school board, the police, the licensing committee. They all protected him. He was charming and successful. I was hysterical. So I took matters into my own hands to get her out. And you lost your license." "I'd lose it again. I'd lose it 1,000 times to have her back." She glanced at her watch. "It's 3:10. I should go." "The bus stop," I realized. "You're still watching." "Different town, same problems. There's a girl there. She reminds me of you. Smart, curious, but her parents are going through a messy, ugly divorce. She's a perfect target." "Can I help?" The words were out of my mouth before I could even think. She studied me for a long moment, her gaze the same one I remembered from that first day, analytical, searching, weighing. "You already are," she said. "Keep volunteering here. Listen to these kids. Really listen. Watch for the signs, the sudden change in behavior, the talk of a secret new friend, the opportunity that sounds too good to be true. Listen when kids try to tell you something's wrong, even when they don't have the right words for it." "Is that enough?" I asked. "It's everything." She reached out and squeezed my shoulder gently, the same firm, urgent grip from that night at the truck stop, but this time it felt different. It wasn't a signal of desperation. It was a transfer of responsibility. The world needs more people who are willing to believe the unbelievable. She turned and walked away, melting into the anonymous afternoon crowd, and I knew I would probably never see her again. But her mission had become a part of me. I kept volunteering, and eventually I became a certified peer counselor. Kids trusted me with their secrets, with their fears, maybe because I understood what it felt like to be screaming the truth, while the adults in your life politely covered their ears. And sometimes when a kid mentions a too-good-to-be-true summer job or a new online friend who is just a little too interested or a counselor who asks invasive questions about their home life, I know exactly what to do. I listen, I believe, and I make the call. I learned from the very best after all. The woman everyone called crazy, the woman who saved my life with a bottle of ipecac, a string of pearls, and a carefully placed note. The woman who lost everything and just kept watching anyway, because someone had to.